Someone took Nancy Guthrie on the night of January 31st. Her daughter Savannah doesn't know where she is. The FBI doesn't know where she is. But someone knows, right now, today, this minute. Someone is living with that knowledge, carrying it, maybe sleeping with it, maybe not sleeping at all. 130 days of silence, $1.2 million on the table. And this week, 3 separate developments happen that tell us something critical about where this investigation is actually headed. Not where the headlines say it's headed, not where the noise and confusion would have you believe, but where the real work, the patient, methodical work happening inside task forces and laboratories, is actually moving. By the end of this video, you will understand why the person who knows what happened to Nancy Guthrie is running out of time, why the pressure is mounting, and why 130 days of silence is about to get much, much louder. If you're new to the Crime Journal, subscribe right now and turn on notifications, because we don't stop. Not until Nancy comes home. Let me start with something that happened earlier this week that most people are glossing over. Jennifer Garner, an actress with hundreds of millions of followers across social media, sat down and said Nancy Guthrie's name out loud to an audience that had never heard it before. Now, on the surface, that might sound like just another celebrity moment, just another famous person talking about a missing person case. But if you understand how actual investigations work, how real tips come in, how real cases actually break, you know this is something different. Think about who Jennifer Garner reaches. Not just true crime viewers, not just people who follow missing persons cases religiously. Think about the nurse scrolling through her feed before a shift. Think about the mechanic listening in his garage. Think about the person sitting in a waiting room somewhere. Someone who had never heard Nancy Guthrie's name until Jennifer Garner's voice came through their phone. And somewhere among those millions of people is someone who knows something. Maybe they know because they saw something on January 31st that didn't make sense at the time. Maybe they know because someone they're close to changed overnight, became anxious, withdrawn, paranoid, right around the time the doorbell footage went public. Maybe they know because they have a detail, just one detail, that they've been sitting on for 130 days, thinking it probably doesn't matter. It matters. Elizabeth Smart's father has talked publicly about this. He said the relentless media attention on his daughter's case, the noise, the repetition, the constant presence of her name and face, was what ultimately led to her rescue. Someone who knew something heard her name at exactly the right moment and finally decided to speak. That's how cases break. Not always with dramatic forensic revelations. Sometimes with one person in one moment, hearing something that connects a dot they've been carrying for months. The more people who say Nancy Guthrie's name, the closer we get to that moment. And this week, the reach got a lot wider. Now let me tell you what one of the most respected forensic minds in America said about this case this week. Jim Clemente spent 22 years as a supervisory special agent inside the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit. His entire career has been dedicated to understanding the psychology of people who commit terrible crimes, and more importantly, understanding the mistakes that lead to their capture. This week, Clemente analyzed the doorbell footage, and he used one specific word to describe the suspect: bumbling. Now, before you think that sounds like good news, let me explain exactly what that means and why it's significant. For months, there's been a debate about whether this suspect is sophisticated or not. On one hand, there's evidence of planning, surveillance visits before the crime, timing, knowledge of the home's layout, an understanding of how to move through it in darkness. Those things suggest discipline and forethought. But then you look at what the camera actually captured. The vegetation stuffed in front of the lens, the flashlight held in the mouth, the improvised attempts to block the camera view, the one detail that most people missed, the visible tattoo on the wrist. Clemente's analysis cuts through the contradiction. He said, this wasn't a sophisticated offender executing a perfect plan. This was someone who planned certain elements but then improvised poorly in the moment, and those improvisations created mistakes. And here's why that detail matters forensically. A tattoo is documented. When someone is arrested, that tattoo gets photographed, cataloged, entered into law enforcement databases. It gets described by witnesses. It becomes part of a permanent record. Right now, the FBI has images of that wrist tattoo from the doorbell footage. When investigators develop a suspect through DNA work, through genealogy, through tips, through the thousands of video feeds they're analyzing, they'll have something to corroborate. A name, a tattoo that matches, physical evidence that holds up in a courtroom. But there's something else Clemente said that I want you to really sit with. He said the moment those doorbell images went public, the moment this suspect saw themselves on the news, would have been a psychological shock. The kind of shock that creates behavioral ripples. People around that person would have noticed something, a reaction too big or too small. Anxiety appearing from nowhere. Someone suddenly withdrawing from work, from friends, from normal life. A change in routine that started right around February 10th when those images went public. Someone noticed that change. Maybe it was a coworker. Maybe it was someone they live with. Maybe it was a family member who saw the behavioral shift and felt the fear but didn't know what to do with it. If that person is watching this right now, if you're the one who saw the change, the sudden anxiety, the reaction that didn't match any explanation that was given, what you noticed is evidence. Your observation matters. $1.2 million is waiting for that phone call, and it can be completely anonymous. Now, this is where things get complicated, and I need to walk you through this carefully because it involves senior law enforcement officials saying different things about the same events. Sheriff Chris Nano spoke to People magazine this week, and he revealed something significant about the investigation's current direction. He said investigators are focused on digital evidence. Specifically, he said thousands and thousands of videos, ring cameras, traffic cameras, business surveillance footage. Every angle along every possible route someone could have traveled on the night of January 31st into February 1st. That tells you something important. The digital evidence trail extends far beyond what's been made public. Investigators are working a specific geography, a route, a series of timestamps. They're building a grid of cameras covering the area between Nancy's home and somewhere, wherever she was taken. That work is slow, but it's moving in a direction. He also said something that matters even more. Tips are still coming in every single day. On day 130, that's not the language of a cold case. That's not the sound of an investigation running on empty. That's active. That's moving. But then Nano said something about the FBI's involvement that created a problem. He said, coordination with the FBI began soon after learning of Nancy's disappearance. The FBI was with us day one. And then he added, Director Patel has his right to his opinions, but some remarks were factually inaccurate. Here's the tension. FBI Director Kash Patel made specific, detailed public claims. On Sean Hannity's podcast, Patel said the FBI was kept out for 4 days. He said he had hundreds of agents ready to deploy. He said he had a fixed-wing aircraft on standby ready to transport evidence to Quantico that same night. He said the Sheriff's Department sent DNA to a private lab in Florida instead of to federal facilities. Those are specific claims. Named. Made under the weight of his position as FBI director, and Nanos essentially said that's not how it happened. Now, here's what we need to be clear about. Both of these men cannot be completely accurate. Something in those timelines doesn't match. But the question of who's telling the full truth is more complicated than it might seem. Here's what we actually know. The DNA that Patel says his agency was ready to process on night one did eventually arrive at Quantico, but it took 11 weeks. 11 weeks before it got there, with an FBI aircraft sitting on a runway, apparently ready to move it immediately. That delay happened. That's documented. Sergeant Aaron Cross, someone inside the Pima County Sheriff's Department, described the first week of this investigation as chaotic and disorganized. That's not an outside critic. That's someone who was there. And the Pima County Board of Supervisors, bipartisan, from both parties, called for Sheriff Nanos to resign. One supervisor said, "There's no wonder why we're having such a horrible time solving this case. It's laid directly on the sheriff's shoulders." On May 12th, they used a territorial-era law to compel Nanos to give sworn testimony about his own conduct and resume. That's not how boards treat sheriffs they believe are doing their jobs. So what do we take from this contradiction? The most honest answer is, the early coordination between the FBI and local law enforcement was not seamless. There were delays. There was confusion about process and authority. There were decisions that, in hindsight, cost time. What matters now is not who was technically in the room on which day. What matters is that the evidence, DNA at Quantico, thousands of videos being analyzed, tips still coming in on day 130, is still being processed. It's still moving. The investigation is not cold. The investigation is not stuck. It's slow. But slow doesn't mean stopped. Let me bring these three developments together, because when you look at what they're actually telling us, a picture forms. First, the reach is expanding. Jennifer Garner brought Nancy Guthrie's name to millions of people who had never heard it before. That's not noise. That's potential. That's the possibility that somewhere in those millions is the one person who has been carrying this secret for 130 days. Second, the evidence is there. Jim Clemente told us something genuinely important. Not that this case is almost solved, but that the mistakes are embedded in the physical record. The tattoo, the behavioral change, the improvisation under pressure. These aren't vague hopes. These are specific markers that investigators are working toward right now. Third, the work is still moving. The thousands of videos, the tips arriving on day 130, the DNA at Quantico being analyzed by the same agency that cracked the Golden State Killer case, the genetic genealogy work building family trees from partial DNA matches, all of it is still moving, slowly, carefully, in a way designed to produce evidence that will hold up in a courtroom, not evidence that feeds a news cycle. Jim Clemente didn't say this case is almost over. He said the mistakes will eventually speak. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old. She has been missing for 130 days. On Mother's Day, her daughter Savannah posted, and the words she wrote are impossible to read without understanding the full weight of them. We miss you with every breath. We will never stop looking for you. We will never be at peace until we find you. That's not hyperbole. That's a daughter who has spent 130 days not knowing whether her mother is alive or dead, whether she's been suffering, whether she's scared, whether she's still here at all. There's a pacemaker in Nancy Guthrie's chest, a small device the size of a matchbox. It's been running for 130 days. It's been keeping count of every heartbeat, every hour she's been gone. Someone knows where that heartbeat is right now. Someone knows what happened on January 31st. Maybe they've been staying quiet because they're afraid of retaliation. Maybe they're afraid of getting involved. Maybe they made a choice on January 32nd that they've been living with ever since. And the weight of that choice has only gotten heavier. Every time Nancy Guthrie's name comes back into the headlines, that weight increases. Every video, every share, every time someone hears her name, that pressure grows. Because the person holding this secret knows that investigators want what they know. And what they might want more is to finally not carry it alone anymore for another day. 130 days is already too long. One phone call, completely anonymous. $1.2 million. That money is real. That money is unclaimed. And someone out there knows something they haven't said yet. If you have any information about Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, call the FBI. Immediately at 1-800-CALL-FBI. You can also contact the Pima County Sheriff's Department at 520-351-4900. The reward is $1.2 million. It's real, it's unclaimed, it's waiting, and if you're the person who saw something on January 31st, or the person who noticed the behavioral change on February 10th, or the person who's been carrying a piece of this for 130 days, you don't have to carry it alone anymore. Make that call. And this Nancy Guthrie is a mother. She's a grandmother. She's a woman who should have been safe inside her own home. She deserves to come home. She deserves justice. And her family deserves answers. Share this video right now. The more eyes on this case, the more pressure on the one person who knows what happened. We are not stopping until Nancy comes home. If you're new to the Crime Journal, subscribe right now and turn on notifications, because justice doesn't rest, and neither do we.